If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This is another of our popular Listener's Choice interviews, which we're playing over the weekend. We've chosen the most popular interviews for you to select the Listener's Choice winner. If you're not sure how the Listener's Choice competition works, have a look at horsechats.com/choice for the rules and the leaderboard. Horse welfare and safety are of utmost importance where humans have any interaction with horses. Within the courses at International Horse College, we only utilise methods that promote safe and humane ways of interaction between horses and humans. We only support safe methods of educating riders, handlers and trainers about horse welfare. internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. I'm very happy to be introducing Dr. Peter Huntington today. Actually, he's not an introduction because he's been here before. Dr. Peter Huntington was on episode number 244. Dr. Peter Huntington is a vet who specialises in equine nutrition and conducts ongoing research and investigation into the nutrition of horses, and is also the Director of Equine Nutrition of Kerr Australia Division. Now, Peter, today we're going to be talking about 10 tips of basic feeding principles. Is that correct? How are you anyway?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Good, thanks, Glenys.
Good,
yeah.
good.
So, this is a really important, the topic sort of sounds very dry, but if you get the basics wrong, then you can do all the fancy things you like in the world and the horse won't have a proper feeding program.
Yep. And I think we've got a wide variety of listeners. And I know that you advise people with their top performance horses, but these are the basics that we need to get right. So these are really relevant to everyone with horses.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone needs to worry about these sort of things, and particularly in times of drought in a lot of the country, where people need to change the way they feed their horses because they don't have as much grass to eat, or hay becomes very expensive or unaffordable or unavailable, and so you've got to sort of go back to basics to work out the best plan to follow.
All right, so the first one we've got is adequate forage intake. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, well, the horse evolved as a sort of grazing animal for most of the year, I guess, enough pasture to eat, or grasses, shall we say, grasses to eat, not pasture.
Yep.
And grasses are forages. They're full of fibre. The horse needs the fibre for its digestive health, and it ferments it as an energy source. And many horses can live perfectly happily on just forage. So the horse needs a certain amount of forage, and where you have problems is when people start feeding concentrates or hard feeds and they don't have adequate supplies of available pasture, or you have green pasture that's very short and there's not much there, or you have dry pasture that's not there either, like you do in a drought, and they have to supplement forage, and that's usually in the form of hay or chaff, and very often they're not fed enough. And many racehorses are not fed enough forage. The horse, they need the absolute minimum of 1% of their body weight per day. So our typical 500 kg horse, which is not so typical these days because the introduction of all the warm bloods and things like that, lots of ponies, there's lots of bigger and smaller horses than that, but they're needing absolute minimum of around, 5.5 kgs of hay. More ideal, if you're feeding at all, if you're feeding hay and chaff, more ideal would be 1.5%, so of body weight, so up around 8 kgs of hay, or you're using a forage-based concentrate.
Okay. All right. Now, the next one you've got, this is number 2, is feeding to meet the workload. This is where you start to introduce other things. Is it, we've got the forage and this is where we start to introduce other things, or can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, that's correct. As horses work harder, horses at maintenance, they're doing some moving around the paddock if they're in a paddock, and that exercise is actually good for them. It's good for their digestive health, their mental health, and it is some sort of exercise. They need more energy than they would if they were just standing in a stable or a yard. Now, when we put them into work, they're exercising at greater speeds for longer periods of time, and so require energy to fuel muscle contraction. And so that means that you've got to supply that. Now, some lightly worked horses can meet their energy needs on forage alone, but there are, as the intensity of work, either the speed or the duration goes up, you often need to add concentrate feeds to meet their energy supplies. But what's most important is that people don't overestimate the amount of work they're doing, and walking and trotting around for 20 minutes or something is not hard work. So while a hard-working horse, e.g. A base horse or endurance horse or perhaps a top-level 3-day eventer or a hard-working polocross horse might need double the energy that they need at maintenance, and therefore a lot more concentrates. Your average weekend warrior that's ridden for a short period of time, mainly at a walk, doesn't need that. One of the problems you get with overfeeding energy is that leads to behaviour issues. So overfed horses, and particularly horses that are not worked hard enough, are much more prone to behaviour problems or issues or risks of laminitis.
Yep. So, Peter, when people are introducing the more energy, the more concentrate, is this where we lose the forage intake? Because you said there was a bit of a problem with racehorse trainers introducing the concentrate to get the speed so the horses can work harder and win, but then they lose the forage intake. Is that what the problem is there?
Yes, it is, in that there's a sort of perception that if you feed horses too much chaff or hay, too much forage, they won't eat their concentrate. Mm-hmm. And often it's the other way around, because when they're fed enough forage, their gut, their stomach and their hindgut function well, and that doesn't have an effect on appetite. Whereas if you've got a dysfunctional stomach with gastric ulcers or hindgut with acidosis, then you have reduced appetite. So there's some misconceptions about the impact of adequate forage on appetite for concentrates.
Okay, good. Now, if we move on to number 3, which is your body conditioning scoring, can you talk a little bit about the background of the body conditioning scoring, how it was evolved, and even where people can get a copy of the body conditioning scoring that we're talking about?
Sure. Body conditioning scoring is a sort of semi-objective assessment of the body fat content of horses. It's equivalent to the sort of, I suppose you'd say, the BMI that we, a number that we're used with human health, mm-hmm. which is looking to assess how thin or fat you are. And it came out of other animals, and the actual Australian-based body condition scoring system was something that I devised in the early 1980s with the help of some other vets, particularly Dr. Lex Carroll. And so we devised this, we modified an English system to make something that applied to horses of different sizes. And we have a sort of 0 to 5 scale with half points, and 0 being very, very poor. Obviously, that horse is very sick or not being fed enough, and 5 being very fat, and the very fat, and both ends of the spectrum are unhealthy. And these days you seem to see more horses in the fat end of the spectrum. Fat is 4 and above, then we have 4.5 and 5. And they're really unhealthy situations, and you have a higher risk of a number of metabolic disorders, including laminitis or including equine metabolic syndrome. So there is also an American system, which is a 1 to 9 system that follows a similar sort of chart, and that was devised for around quarter horse broodmares. So it's used in a number of countries of the world, but the Australian one, the 0 to 5 one. And the relevance of it is that it's a guide to how thin or fat the horse is, and therefore how is it in the right body condition for the sort of exercise regime it's doing. because that will vary according to the exercise. It's an indicator of fitness. And the second is, are you overfeeding energy or underfeeding energy? So if horse is losing body condition, then there's a relative energy deficit to the supply and demand curve. If it's gaining it, well, it's got too much energy. And so it is one of the things that people can use to assess the suitability of their feeding program. People can't tell, how much vitamin B2 their horse is being fed. I mean, for example, they can't look really at, the intake of something like zinc. They can't measure that, but you can. And both of those are important nutrients, but energy is much more important, and particularly for the performance horse. So you can look at the body condition, and you can look at changes in body condition, and then go, well, I want to adjust the amount of feed that I'm giving so that I maintain the horse at the right body condition.
Okay, good. I think that was a good explanation.
Now where you can get it, the 0 to 5 system is published in a variety of places. The state departments of agriculture, I know, have sort of what used to be called ag notes with reference to it. My book, Horse Sense, has a section on it. Copyright Feeds, who actually sponsored the original research, had some horse weight estimators that are a slide rule thing that I devised, where you can use, it's got body condition score tables, and you can estimate weight based on girth and length or height and body condition score. And so they're certainly still available, I know. So feed stores that sell copyrights could possibly get them.
Yep.
There are a variety of books have used it.
Okay, good. All right, the next one, number 4, is feed by weight and not volume. And we're talking about the weight of the horse or the weight of the feed?
Well, we're talking about both actually there, Glenys. So the horse's weight determines how much energy it requires or how much protein it requires. All of its nutrients are linked around weight. So your 600 kg horse needs 1.5 times the amount of feed the 400 kg horse, if they're doing the same work and have the same metabolism, as it were.
Yep.
But it also refers to the weight that you put into the feed, be it hay, be it chaff, be it concentrate feeds. And people tend to feed by dippers. I mean, it's a practical thing to do, but they don't realise that different feeds have different weights in the dipper. And sometimes they think that, one dipper of we call them dippers, other countries call them scoops. But a dipper of chaff is a lot lighter, say, than a dipper of a grain.
Yes.
Or a processed food. And people often don't recognise the differences between them. So a chaff dipper that might be sort of 250 grams, the same size dipper will be 1 kg of grain, maybe a bit more of pellets, quite a bit less of extruded feed. And so they think, they're feeding 4 dippers, and therefore they're feeding 4 kilos of feed, and they go, well, why is the horse too thin? Well, because a lot of those feeds are in fact less, you're just feeding less weight. Mm-hmm. So periodically, or when you're setting up your feeding program, weigh out your dippers so you actually know how much you're feeding. Because when I do the calculations about how much concentrate a horse might need to meet its energy needs and other nutrient needs, protein, minerals and vitamins for a certain type of work, then I'm doing that in kilograms, not in dippers.
Okay.
Kilograms or grams.
All right, good. And I think that's a good tip, particularly if the horse is putting on weight or losing weight, just to go back and measure, as you said, measure the weight of the dipper.
Yeah, that's right. And the weight of the hay.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who sort of think, I'm feeding an awful lot of hay, but in fact they're very small, 1 kg biscuits. Okay. Well, the hay is lighter. The weight, when you're buying hay, you want to be buying it, it's the dollars per kilo.
Yep.
And the dollars per unit of energy that matter. Mm-hmm. So don't just think, I buy, this hay is $1 or $2 cheaper a bale, but it's 5 or 6 k's lighter.
Yes. Okay. And I think some of, I know working with people who are buying bulk hay, one of the things they do ask is how many bales per tonne.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. What's the weight of the bale? How many bales per tonne? That's what you need to be buying.
Mm-hmm. All right. The next one we've got, number 5, is keep meal sizes small.
So the horse has got a different sort of digestive system set up to say, other animals or to humans, for example. And that's because of where they evolved with readily available forage, and they were, as we said earlier, or I should have said, they spend a long period of the day eating, 12 to maybe 18 hours. 18 hours, lactating there that's got a high energy need and protein needs. Perhaps, but 12 hours, and that's much more than a cow or a sheep would eat for, and certainly, much more time a day than other animals would eat for. And so what it means is that you need to follow that when you set up the feeding system, particularly, and that's because the horse has a small stomach. Food moves out of the stomach relatively quickly into the small intestine, and it particularly applies to concentrates. Because many concentrates have got quite a lot of starch in them, and the starch is meant to be digested in the small intestine. That's a key energy source, particularly for harder working performance horses.
Yeah.
The starch is meant to be digested, but the horse has a limited capacity to digest starch.
Mm-hmm.
And if the meal size is too large, then that will not be digested in the small intestine, will overflow into the large intestine, be fermented to acid, and start to wreak havoc on large intestinal function. So there's sort of rules of thumb about meal size, and particularly if you've got starchy-based feeds, and the basic rule of thumb is about half a kilo per 100 kilos of body weight is thought to be a good, safe rule of thumb for meal size. Now, there are some around, if you get a bit more sophisticated, some might do it around starch content, but that's a sort of basic rule of thumb. If you're feeding any sort of concentrate, no more than, you've got a 400 kg horse, no more than 2 kilos being fed at any one time.
So how many times a day would a 400 kilo horse have? Say if the 400 kilo horse or 500 kilo horse was stabled, how many times a day should they be being fed?
Well, that depends a bit upon what you're feeding them. So if you were feeding them just hay,
yep,
and a very small amount of concentrate, you could give them one feed of concentrate and leave hay in front of them all day long.
Okay.
And that's the ideal. The ideal scenario is ad-lib hay, but sometimes you've got horses that are stabled or in yards because they're too heavy, mm-hmm. and they're being fed restricted amounts of hay. So you need to, rather than letting them eat all their hay in a couple of hours, you need to spread the hay out. And
okay.
yeah.
Right.
So, we tend to talk about, say, your 400 kg horse doing, reasonable sort of amounts of work,
mm-hmm.
Might be fed twice a day. Racehorses probably should be fed 3 times a day or maybe even 4 times. But practicalities of labour and things like that mean that they're not.
Yeah, and I like the way you say the practicality. We can say a lot of things in theory, but we've got to put it into our day-to-day use as well, haven't we?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, people go to work or school or they're not there. They're doing other things.
Sure.
And it's surprising, actually, that in other animals, automatic feeding systems have evolved so that, people with chicken sheds don't go around, putting the feed in the feeders. It drops in automatically.
Mm.
And I have seen them for horses, but they've never really caught on. And that would be a good way of feeding your horse, trickle feeding your horse,
yes.
as it were. But they haven't caught on yet.
Okay. That might be a good one for someone who's a bit innovative, who's listening to the chat.
Yeah, to invent something.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, number 6 is make feed changes slowly.
Yeah, the horse has got sort of complex bacteria system of and population of bacteria and protozoa and things like that in its large intestine, mm-hmm. Which ferments fibre, and that becomes a source of energy, and that's a really key part of the horse's digestive system. It also has bacterial populations in the stomach that do a bit of fermentation, and so when you change the type of feed, you sort of change the bacterial population. So studies have been done, the term microbiota, which is actually, the health of that bacterial population that's actually linked with a number of disease states, and it's a growing area where we're finding out more and more about the influence of the bacterial population in the gut on health. But you change that with different feeds. So what you need to do is make changes slowly so you allow the horse's digestive tract and particularly the bacterial population time to adapt. You don't have these sort of changes overnight. So even if you were changing the type of hay being fed from, say, grass hay to lucerne hay, then you want to do that slowly because there are differences in the bacterial populations with the two types of hays. Certainly if you're introducing concentrates or new concentrates, you want to do it slowly. Now, if you're changing from one pelleted feed to another pelleted feed, well, that's probably not going to matter too much because they probably have similar ingredients. But if you were changing from a grain-based feed to a pelleted feed or increasing the amount fed, you're wanting to be doing it, over 7 to 10 days, making the changes stepwise in a sort of slow fashion.
Okay. All right, good. And now number 7, you've got following feeding recommendations on the back of the bag.
Well, this is sort of thing done with a bit of a caveat. But it's about, a lot of people use prepared feeds these days, and they're a convenient way of feeding the horse. Means, if they're fed right, you don't need to add too many other supplements, perhaps apart from salt, and obviously the forage that we mentioned early. And when we design a feed, we sort of think about how it should be used, and we fortify that feed with vitamins and minerals, vitamin-mineral premix. And we sort of say, well, this type of horse will feed this amount. So our 400-kilo horse is going to be fed 4 kgs of this feed, to take an example.
Yep.
And that means we put certain concentrations of vitamins and minerals or protein or fat or something like that in there, certain levels of nutrients, which means that horse will have what we think is a balanced diet if they're the normal horse and fed with appropriate forage. And what happens if the horse is only fed 2 kilos? And very often that's the right decision because the horse may be too fat on the food, or maybe have too much energy, may have more energy that needs 4 kilos. What happens when you feed 2 kilos? Well, they get half the amount of minerals and vitamins in particular. So that means a diet that might have been nutritionally balanced isn't now, and you need to top it up with a supplement. So generally speaking, if someone wants to feed 2 kilos, they're better off, looking for another feed which is designed to be fed at 2 kilos a day, rather than cutting a 4 kilo feed down and feeding half of it. Now, you can fix the problem up by adding extra supplements, but then the feeding program becomes a bit more complex. So in general terms, try and follow the recommendations, but if your horse is too fat or too thin or doesn't have enough energy for work or has too much bucking you off, then you've either got to change feeds or change intakes.
Yes, and putting those other supplements in sort of takes away from the simplicity of having that prepared feed.
That's right.
Yeah,
and that it's been designed by somebody that generally knows more than you are about what nutrients horses need, etc.
Yep. All right, now you did talk about making up the shortfalls in vitamin or mineral intake through the inclusion of supplements. Let's just thinking about a situation I knew of where agistment horses were getting a special type of prepared feed. But then it was, my horse is the same thing, bit fat, bucking me off, whatever. So the agistees would then use varying amounts of the prepared feed. So tell us a little bit about making up the shortfalls in vitamin or mineral intake.
Yeah.
What could happen there?
Well, what happens, as you said, is that the horse, that's a vital part of managing your horse, is adjusting the concentrate intake to meet the horse's energy needs, to maintain it in the right condition, to give it enough energy for work and not too much. And that has an impact on inclusion or intake of the minerals and vitamins, particularly that are included in the feed. So we have a situation where the horse will, some horses might be getting 4 or 5 kilos and some horses getting 2 kilos. And so the calcium intake, the copper intake, the selenium, the vitamin E are going to vary. And if you're going to do that properly and feed that horse properly, you'll then top up the 2 kilo horse with a sort of like perhaps a half dose or 2/3 dose of a suitable supplement. Okay. You often don't need a full dose, and that's where you need professional advice. Or the alternatives, you change to another feed that's designed to be fed or has a lower energy feed or is designed to be fed in the way you want to feed your horse.
Okay, good. If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com. You're talking about specialist advice here. Is that something that Kerr does? Can people contact?
Yes, yeah, we have. We have advice. Other feed companies do. The contact number for us is 1-800-772-198, or you can email advice@ker.com. And the Kentucky Equine Research, I think we offer a good feeding and nutrition advice service to people. So if you have queries, or you want to see how you can balance a diet, is your diet balanced? Is it supplying all the nutrients the horse needs? Then yes, we can give that advice.
Great, and we'll put those details on the Horse Chats page as well, just in case people have missed them. Yeah, and then the next one, Peter, feeding supplements according to special needs. So what type of special needs would we be talking about, and what type of supplements?
Supplements, well, I think the ones that come to mind are things like hoof health. Does your horse have poor quality hooves with cracks, with slow hoof growth, with sooty toe, and are they going to benefit from needing a biotin, zinc and methionine supplement like, say, BioBloom, which is our one, which can help increase the amount of hoof growth or the quality of hoof they grow. So not every horse needs that. Some horses are fine. And that's where your adjustment situation, you may want to add a supplement to your horse that the next door person doesn't. Mm-hmm. Electrolytes are another one, which are added to feed to replace what's lost in sweat, or at least the mineral part of what's lost in sweat. And they are, the electrolyte needs depend upon the amount of work the horse does and really the amount of sweat the horse loses. And two horses can do the same amount of work and be very different in terms of their sweat losses. So because of different fitness and metabolism. So electrolytes will vary. Joint supplements are very popular these days. And so if your horse is showing signs of joint disease or you're particularly interested in prevention, you may want to feed that, whereas a horse with normal joints or joints that haven't started to deteriorate doesn't need it. So there's a few situations, ulcer supplements or gut health supplements. There's a number that things for nervous horses. So there's a number around where people feed supplements that are really special needs. Every horse doesn't need them, but every horse does need some added vitamins and minerals over what's in the basic forage and the concentrates, the basic concentrates they need, and they can either be supplied in a properly formulated prepared feed or in a supplement. Good.
All right. Now, before you did talk about the practicality of having horses, that people can only feed twice a day sometimes. And you've gone on now to number 10, which is practical feeding in a herd situations versus individual paddocks. And sometimes people have only got, those herd situations. Sometimes people just say, well, this is the best place I can keep my horse that's close by, that I can see it regularly, and that's what I've got. So what can you say about that?
Well, and horses are herd animals too. They'd rather be in a group than be on their own. And so if you've got your horse in that situation, either you've got to bring it out to feed it individually, or where people are feeding groups of horses, they've got to remember the effects of pecking orders. And that's a dominance thing. One horse will be the boss, and one horse will be at the bottom of the pecking order, and they'll all be at all places in between. And that boss horse will want to keep showing the other one it's the boss by kicking it off its feed bin and going, I'm going to eat your feed. So where people have horses in groups, they need to have feed bins, and rather than having them in a straight line, which is sort of tempting, along the fence, you put them in a big circle, so that the horse that gets kicked off the sort of bottom feed bin doesn't have to walk all the way around to the top of the line to get back onto a feed bin. And also the other good tip is to have one more feed bin than there are horses. So you've sort of always got a spare one there. And that means that, you're going to minimise the influence of pecking order on intake of feed. Now, horses eat at different rates, so you always get some horses eat faster than others, and maybe that's why they're fat and the other horse isn't. But you can't change that. The only thing you can then do is take an individual horse out. And if you've got a group situation and one horse just isn't doing well in there, then you've got to often look at going, okay, I'm going to take that horse out and perhaps put it with another horse and give it a bit of special attention at TLC.
Yep. It's good watching the herd behaviour too, isn't it? You know, sometimes you get the boss horse and they hog too, and you just watch them and you watch the characters and you watch who's the boss, and it's just lovely watching them, them feed. Yep.
It's important, but it's important that every horse gets a crack, a crack at the feed bin.
Yep. All right. Now, Peter, what's the best way to contact you? You talked a little bit before about those specialist services at Kentucky Equine Research. What's the best way again? You did say the number, and we'll put that number on horsechats.com/Peter Huntington too, but just go to horsechats.com, search for Peter or search for Huntington.
We can do that. 1-800-772-198.
Yes.
Or emailing advice@ker.com. I'll also draw people's attention to the library we have, a searchable library on our website at www.ker.com. And we've got a fantastic resource of articles on equinews.com. And people there can sign up for a fortnightly newsletter that comes out into their email and has a number of articles of interest, or they can go there and search for something that's a particular interest to them.
Yep, perfect. All right, that's great, Peter. Thanks again for coming. Thanks for sharing your time, sharing your expertise, and I'm sure that our listeners will be very happy to have all that extra information from you today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Grant.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.